As the geopolitical landscape continues to shift, the intersection of climate policy and international trade has come under increasing scrutiny, particularly amidst the ongoing US-China trade war. Recent developments have illuminated how economic rivalries are reshaping global climate politics, raising critical questions about the future of multilateral cooperation on environmental issues. The conflict between the United States and China, two of the world's largest economies, has intensified in recent months, evidenced by aggressive tariff impositions and strategic maneuvering over critical technologies. Notably, the U.S. government has set tariffs of up to 3,521% on solar panels imported from Southeast Asia, a move that would have seemed far-fetched just a year ago. This dramatic shift underscores the growing tension in U.S.-China relations, where economic competition is increasingly framed within the context of national security. The consequences of these economic hostilities extend beyond immediate market disruptions. They exacerbate the already critical climate crisis. Last year marked the warmest on record, surpassing the Paris Agreement's target of limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Extreme weather events ranging from devastating wildfires to catastrophic cyclones displaced millions, as reported by the World Meteorological Organization. The urgency to address climate change has never been more pressing, yet the geopolitical landscape complicates these efforts. At the Munich Security Conference held earlier this year, global leaders identified climate change as a paramount security risk, yet the discourse predominantly revolved around geopolitical tensions rather than cooperative solutions. The US and China's rivalry has led to a rejection of multilateralism, with both nations prioritizing their own national interests over global consensus on climate action. This trend raises critical questions about how nations will navigate their environmental commitments in an increasingly fragmented world. In this context, China has been strategically repositioning itself to maintain its dominance in low-carbon technologies. As U.S. tariffs have forced some Chinese companies to reroute their production through Southeast Asia, there is a concerted effort from Beijing to stimulate demand for its clean energy products in emerging markets. Huang Yiping, dean of the Institute of South-South Cooperation and Development at Peking University, advocates for a Chinese Marshall Plan for clean technology, which would not only support domestic manufacturers but also enhance global partnerships in renewable energy. China's approach to climate policy is thus deeply intertwined with its economic strategy, focusing on expanding its influence in the global south. The demand for Chinese solar panels, wind power technology and electric vehicles has surged, with more than half of these exports now directed towards emerging economies rather than Western markets. This pivot reflects a broader ambition to position itself as a leader in the green transition, even as it navigates the complexities of its trade relations with the U.S. Simultaneously, the U.S. has adopted a more combative stance, motivated by a desire to protect its domestic industries and workers from foreign competition. The introduction of the Foreign Pollution Fee Act by U.S. Senators Bill Cassidy and Lindsey Graham illustrates a growing recognition of the nexus between climate policy, national security, and economic strategy. This legislation aims to create a framework that combines environmental goals with the protection of American manufacturing, echoing sentiments expressed by industry leaders who are increasingly concerned about the competitive edge of Chinese firms. As both nations grapple with their respective climate and trade policies, the implications for global governance are profound. The hope for coordinated global action, once embodied by forums like the UNFCCC, appears increasingly distant. Instead, a new paradigm of climate politics is emerging, one that prioritizes state-centric approaches over multilateral agreements. This shift necessitates a nuanced understanding of how national interests, trade dynamics, and climate strategies intersect. Looking ahead, the future of climate diplomacy will likely hinge on the ability of nations to reconcile their economic ambitions with the urgent need for environmental stewardship. As the US-China rivalry continues to unfold, the stakes for global climate action are higher than ever. The challenge will be to forge pathways for collaboration amidst the backdrop of heightened geopolitical tensions. particularly as countries in the global south make pivotal decisions that will shape the trajectory of both their economies and the planet's climate. The urgency for coherent cooperative climate strategies has never been more crucial as the world stands at a crossroads caught between the imperatives of economic competition and the existential threat of climate change. In a landscape marked by escalating tensions and shifting alliances, recent developments in trade negotiations between the United States and China have sent ripples through global markets and consumer sentiment. A notable increase in consumer confidence was reported following a temporary truce between the two economic superpowers, hinting at the profound impacts of trade policies on everyday life. This shift underscores the intricate interplay of economic factors and geopolitical maneuvering that define the current landscape. On May 27, 2025, Axios reported a significant jump in consumer sentiment in the wake of the US-China trade truce, which came as officials from both nations announced a temporary reduction in tariffs. This shift has sparked hope among consumers and businesses alike, suggesting a potential easing of the trade war that had cast a long shadow over economic prospects. This enhanced consumer confidence is particularly crucial as it aligns with a period of post-pandemic recovery and economic stabilization efforts in both countries. Yet the trade war's impact is far from trivial. A recent analysis by the New York Times highlighted the precarious state of the Chinese economy, where high youth unemployment and a sluggish housing market have left millions vulnerable. Economists like Alicia Garcia Herrero from Natixis emphasized that the current situation is markedly worse than during the early years of the trade conflict. With new graduates entering a saturated job market and the manufacturing sector facing potential job losses, the stakes have never been higher for China's policymakers. As negotiations continue, the implications extend beyond mere tariffs. The trade war has forced China to seek new economic alliances, particularly with countries in Southeast Asia and the Gulf Cooperation Council (GCC). During a recent summit in Kuala Lumpur, Chinese Premier Li Qiang emphasized the need for international cooperation, stating, "We need to enable domestic and international circulations, so that companies across the world can fully share in China's development." This call for collaboration reflects China's strategic pivot to bolster its economic ties amid a challenging global trade environment. The U.S. administration, meanwhile, remains reactive to market fluctuations and geopolitical dynamics. President Trump has not shied away from making bold statements, recently delaying proposed tariffs on European goods as negotiations with the EU progress. His administration has expressed a desire for reciprocal trade agreements that could ease the economic burden on American consumers and industries. However, the threat of further tariffs looms large, with Trump warning of significant duties on imports unless companies like Apple shift their production to the U.S. As these negotiations unfold, the potential for broader economic ramifications remains. The trade war has already disrupted supply chains and contributed to inflationary pressures across various sectors, affecting everything from consumer goods to critical industries reliant on international trade. The ongoing uncertainty has left companies grappling with the prospect of rising costs and shifting market dynamics. In conclusion, as the U.S. and China navigate this complex landscape of trade relations, the implications are profound, not only for their economies but for global markets at large. The delicate balance between protectionism and cooperation will shape future developments, influencing consumer behavior, corporate strategies, and geopolitical alliances. The coming weeks and months will be critical as both nations work to solidify their positions in an increasingly interconnected world, with the potential to redefine the terms of global trade for years to come. As tensions escalate in the Asia-Pacific region, China is increasingly exploring strategies to counter potential U.S. intervention in the event of a conflict over Taiwan. A recent analysis highlights a range of tactics that Beijing may employ, which could significantly shift the balance of power in the region. At the forefront of these discussions is the concept of strategic deterrence, a strategy that aims to convince the United States that the risks associated with intervening in a Taiwan conflict are too high. Beijing's approach could involve cyber attacks on critical infrastructure in the U.S., such as power grids and telecommunications, as well as leveraging its expanding nuclear arsenal. According to the Department of Defense, China's nuclear stockpile has seen substantial growth, reportedly increasing to over 600 operational warheads by late 2024. This strategic posture suggests that Chinese leadership believes it can limit the scope of any conflict, potentially emboldening them to pursue aggressive actions. The implications of U.S. involvement are critical to China's military calculations. Although the U.S. has adopted a policy of strategic ambiguity regarding its response to a potential invasion of Taiwan, this stance leaves open the question of whether Washington would intervene, and if so, how decisively. Some military analysts posit that U.S. intervention would present significant challenges for the People's Liberation Army (PLA), particularly in operations that would require maritime and air superiority. The presence of advanced U.S. military assets, including fifth-generation fighters and nuclear submarines, complicates the PLA's operational plans, especially in scenarios involving a blockade or a full-scale invasion. In light of these complexities, Beijing is considering multiple options to counter U.S. intervention. The first, termed system destruction warfare, involves targeting U.S. military capabilities through precision strikes and cyber warfare, aiming to disrupt American mobilization and sustainment efforts in the Western Pacific. While this approach could provide tactical advantages, it also risks escalating the conflict uncontrollably. Alternatively, China might opt for a fait accompli strategy where it conducts military exercises that mask preparations for an invasion, potentially catching the U.S. off guard. This tactic recalls Russia's approach prior to its actions in Georgia in 2008, although the scale of a direct military engagement would likely exceed the capacity of mere exercises to disguise. Another avenue for Beijing could involve coercing U.S. allies in the region, such as Japan, South Korea, and Australia, to deny access to their bases for American forces. This strategy relies on the premise that these nations would prioritize their own security over U.S. military initiatives. Lastly, China may seek to bolster its strategic deterrence through a combination of nuclear and non-nuclear capabilities. This could include threats of cyber attacks on American infrastructure and the development of anti-satellite weapons, all designed to dissuade U.S. policymakers from committing to a military response. The broader context reveals a Chinese perception of U.S. decline, characterized by political polarization and economic challenges. This narrative could further embolden Beijing's leadership, fostering a belief that the U.S. lacks the resolve to engage in a prolonged conflict over Taiwan. As the U.S. navigates these evolving dynamics, it must articulate a clear strategy that emphasizes the interconnectedness of homeland defense and Indo-Pacific security. Engaging in large-scale military exercises and re-establishing dialogues on strategic stability may help deter Chinese aggression. Ultimately, as tensions continue to rise, the actions taken by both Washington and Beijing will shape the geopolitical landscape of the region, with significant implications for global security. In conclusion, the potential for conflict over Taiwan remains a pressing concern, underscoring the need for careful diplomacy and robust defense strategies. As both nations prepare for various scenarios, the stakes could not be higher, setting the stage for a critical period in U.S.-China relations that will demand astute leadership and strategic foresight.